Hi, everyone, and welcome to Speak Up. I'm Ryan, and this is the podcast where we help you learn English and improve your language skills, one step at a time. It's always exciting to connect with all of you and dive into topics that make your learning journey smoother and more effective. Today, we're tackling something incredibly important, something that most of us don't even realize is slowing us down when we're trying to learn a new language. We're talking about negative self-talk. If you've ever caught yourself thinking, I'll never be good at English, or I always mess up when I try to speak, then you know what I mean. Negative self-talk can be a sneaky but powerful barrier to progress. And trust me, you're not alone in this. Many learners struggle with these thoughts, but the good news is there's a way to stop it and even turn it into something positive that can speed up your learning.
That's so true, Ryan, and I'm really glad we're diving into this topic today. Hi, everyone. I'm Priya, and I want to echo what Ryan just said. Negative self-talk is such a common challenge, but it's one we don't talk about enough. In this episode, we're going to explore how this internal dialogue shapes your mindset and your ability to learn English. By the time we're done, you'll understand why those little comments you make to yourself matter so much. You'll also learn how to recognize when you're engaging in negative self-talk. And most importantly, how to replace it with thoughts that boost your confidence and motivation. So, if you've been feeling stuck, frustrated, or like you're not making the progress you want, this episode is for you. Stay with us because we're not just pointing out the problem. We're also giving you practical solutions to help you grow faster and feel better about your journey.
Exactly, Priya. This is about creating a shift in the way we think, and that shift can make all the difference in how quickly and effectively you learn English. So, let's get started. Whether you're just beginning or have been working on your skills for a while, there's something here for everyone.
Absolutely, Ryan. Let's jump in and tackle the first step to breaking free from negative self-talk. It's going to be an eye-opener for many of you.
Now that we've set the stage, let's dive into what negative self-talk really is. Picture this. You're sitting in a room trying to practice English, and there's this little voice in your head saying things like, I'm not good at this, or I'll never be fluent. That voice? That's what we call negative self-talk. It's an internal dialogue that runs in your mind, and while it might seem harmless, it can be a big obstacle to your progress. Negative self-talk isn't just about doubting yourself occasionally. It's a consistent, critical voice that undermines your confidence and self-esteem. For language learners, it can show up in ways that stop you from even trying. For example, have you ever thought, why bother speaking? People won't understand me anyway. Or, I always make mistakes, so I'm just not cut out for this. These kinds of thoughts don't just make you feel bad. They can actually slow down your ability to learn and grow.
Exactly, Ryan. And I want to emphasize that negative self-talk isn't just about being a little self-critical. It's about the patterns of thoughts we develop over time, and they can become so automatic that we barely notice them. Think about it. When you're learning English and you make a mistake, what's your first reaction? Do you shrug it off and say, okay, I'll learn from that? Or do you hear yourself saying, see, I knew I'd mess up? Let's take some specific examples. You're in a conversation, and instead of focusing on what you've done well, like using new vocabulary or forming sentences, you tell yourself, I sounded so awkward. Or when you listen to a native speaker, you might think, I'll never be able to speak like that. These thoughts feel small in the moment, but they pile up, making you hesitant to speak, try, or even believe that you can improve. And here's the thing. Negative self-talk is something everyone deals with at some point. But the key is recognizing it so you can start to change it.
That's such an important point, Priya. Negative self-talk often feels like it's just the truth, but it's actually a distorted perspective. It tricks your mind into focusing only on your weaknesses and mistakes, while ignoring your strengths and progress. And the worst part is, if you don't catch it, it can become a habit, a default setting in your brain that stops you from reaching your full potential. But before we dive into how to overcome it, let's really take a moment to reflect on how common this is. If you've ever caught yourself thinking, "I'm not good enough," "I'll never improve," or "I should just give up," you're not alone. So many learners feel this way, and that's why understanding negative self-talk is the first step to stopping it.
Absolutely, Ryan. And that's why this conversation is so important. Recognizing these thoughts is like shining a light on them. Once you're aware of them, you can begin to see how they're holding you back. And as we continue, we're going to show you how to flip those thoughts around so they don't control your progress. Ready to move to the next step?
Let's do it, Priya. This is where things start to get exciting, so stay with us as we explore the impact negative self-talk has and how you can take control. So now that we know what negative self-talk is, let's explore where it actually comes from. Because understanding the root of the problem is the first step in solving it. Negative self-talk often stems from personal experiences, especially when things didn't go as planned. Think back to a time when you tried to speak English but struggled to find the right words, or maybe someone couldn't understand you. Those moments can stick with you, and over time, they can build up into this fear that you'll fail again. For example, imagine you're in a class and you mispronounce a word. If someone laughs even casually, it can make you feel self-conscious. That single experience can plant a seed of self-doubt. Later on, when you're in a similar situation, that little voice in your head might say, "Remember what happened last time? Don't risk it again." These experiences can create a pattern where every small mistake feels like a big failure. And before you know it, that inner critic is running the show.
Exactly, Ryan. And while personal experiences play a big role, external influences can be just as impactful. Think about the times when someone made a critical comment about your English. Maybe a teacher pointed out a mistake in a way that felt harsh, or a friend corrected you but didn't do it kindly. Even small offhand remarks like, "Your accent sounds funny," can stay with you. These comments might not seem like a big deal in the moment, but they can shape how you see yourself as a language learner. Then there's the issue of comparison, something so many of us struggle with. When you're learning English, it's easy to look at someone who's fluent and think, "Why can't I be like that?" Or, "I'll never get there." Social media makes this even worse because you see people showing off their perfect grammar or effortless speaking. But what you don't see is the hard work and mistakes it took them to get there. When you set unrealistic expectations for yourself, it's almost like you're giving that negative self-talk permission to take over. You start thinking, "If I'm not perfect, I'm failing," which is just not true.
That's such a great point, Priya. Comparing yourself to others, or even to your idea of what perfect fluency looks like, can be a huge trigger for negative self-talk. It creates this cycle where you're constantly measuring yourself against a standard that's either impossible or just not relevant to your journey. And when you don't meet that standard, it feels like proof that you're not good enough. What's interesting is that most of the time, this negative self-talk isn't even based on reality. It's based on fear, assumptions, or past experiences that you've held onto for too long. And the thing about holding on to those experiences is that they start to color everything you do. You might hesitate to practice speaking because you're afraid of making a mistake, or you might avoid joining conversations because you're worried about being judged. And the more you avoid, the stronger that negative self-talk becomes.
Exactly, Ryan. It's like a loop that feeds on itself. The more you listen to those critical thoughts, the more power they have over your actions. But the good news is, once you identify where these thoughts are coming from, you can start to break the cycle. For anyone listening right now, take a moment to think about your own experiences. Has a bad memory, a harsh comment, or an unrealistic comparison been fueling your self-doubt? If so, you're not alone. And the fact that you're recognizing it is already a step in the right direction. In the next section, we'll talk about how these thoughts actually affect your progress and what you can do to stop them.
That's going to be a game changer, Priya. Stay with us, because understanding the impact of negative self-talk is key to turning things around. All right. So now that we've explored where negative self-talk comes from, let's talk about how it affects your language learning, starting with motivation. Motivation is the driving force behind any skill you want to master, and negative self-talk has this sneaky way of draining it. For instance, imagine you're sitting down to study or practice English, but in the back of your mind you're thinking, "What's the point? I'm never going to get this right." Thoughts like that make it harder to even begin. It's like trying to run a race while carrying a heavy backpack. You're dragging yourself down before you've even started. And it's not just about starting. Negative self-talk can stop you from pushing forward. You might think, "Why should I try learning new vocabulary? I'll probably just forget it." Or, "If I try to speak, I'll mess up, and everyone will judge me." These thoughts create this fear of failure that leads to avoidance. And when you avoid speaking or experimenting with new words, you miss out on the very things that could help you improve. It becomes a cycle. You don't try, so you don't grow, and then that reinforces the belief that you're not capable. It's like a trap that keeps you stuck.
That's such a powerful analogy, Ryan. Negative self-talk is like a mental weight that makes every step in your learning journey feel harder than it needs to be. And I want to build on what you said about avoidance because it's such a common response to these thoughts. When you're afraid of making mistakes, it's easy to convince yourself to stay quiet in a conversation or stick to the same basic words you've always used. But the problem with that is, growth comes from stepping out of your comfort zone. Let's break it down. If you avoid trying, you're not just missing opportunities to practice. You're also missing chances to prove to yourself that you can improve. Every small win, like using a new word correctly, or having a short conversation in English, builds your confidence. But when negative self-talk stops you from even attempting, you're robbing yourself of those wins. Over time, this can create a feeling of stagnation, where it seems like you're not moving forward no matter what you do. And that can make it even harder to find the motivation to keep going.
Exactly, Priya. It's almost like a domino effect. One negative thought can lead to avoidance, which leads to missed opportunities, and then you start believing, "See, I'm not improving." But here's the thing. This isn't about your actual ability to learn English. It's about the mindset you're carrying with you as you learn. And let's not forget how exhausting it can be to deal with negative self-talk on a daily basis. It takes up mental energy that you could be using to focus on learning. Instead of thinking, "How can I explain this idea?" Or, "What's the best way to express this thought?" you're caught up in, "What if I say it wrong?" That constant second-guessing makes learning feel like a chore instead of an exciting challenge.
That's so true, Ryan. And I think it's important to acknowledge that motivation isn't something that just magically appears. It's something you cultivate by taking action and seeing progress. But when negative self-talk gets in the way, it stops that process before it can even start. For everyone listening, I want you to think about this. What would happen if you approach learning English without the fear of failure? If you told yourself, "It's okay to make mistakes because every mistake is a step forward"? Shifting that perspective can be incredibly liberating, and it's something we'll talk about in more detail as we get into solutions. For now, just remember this. Negative self-talk doesn't reflect your actual abilities. It's a mindset that can be changed.
Absolutely, Priya. Changing that mindset is the key to unlocking your full potential, and we're going to show you exactly how to do that. But before we get there, let's dive deeper into some other ways negative self-talk affects your learning, because understanding the problem fully is the first step to solving it. All right, now let's talk about how negative self-talk impacts your confidence, which is absolutely essential for speaking English fluently. Confidence is what allows you to express yourself without constantly second-guessing everything you say. But when that inner voice is constantly telling you things like, "You're not good enough," or "You'll just embarrass yourself," it's like putting a roadblock in your path. Think about it. If you don't believe in your own abilities, how can you expect others to understand or value what you're saying? This lack of confidence often shows up as hesitancy when speaking. You might pause too much, overthink every word, or even avoid conversations altogether. And the irony is, avoiding these interactions only reinforces that negative self-talk. It makes you feel like, "See, I knew I couldn't do it," when in reality it's the fear, not your actual ability, that's holding you back.
That's such a good point, Ryan. Confidence isn't just about how you feel. It directly affects how you perform. When you're confident, you're more likely to take risks, like trying out a new phrase or joining a conversation with native speakers. But when your confidence is low because of negative self-talk, you're constantly doubting yourself. This can lead to what I like to call the hesitation loop. You start speaking, but then you think, what if I say the wrong word? Or what if my grammar isn't perfect? That hesitation disrupts the flow of your speech, and suddenly, what could have been a simple sentence turns into a stressful experience. Over time, this makes speaking in English feel more like a chore than an opportunity to communicate. And as you said, Ryan, the more you avoid speaking, the more that little voice in your head starts to feel like it's right.
Exactly, Priya. And it doesn't stop at confidence. It also has a big impact on your overall progress. Negative self-talk creates a mental block that prevents you from focusing on what really matters, improvement. Instead of thinking, how can I learn from this mistake? You're stuck thinking, I can't make mistakes. And that fear of failure keeps you from pushing yourself to practice or try new things. Here's the thing, language learning is all about making mistakes. It's not just part of the process, it's the process. Every mistake you make teaches you something valuable, whether it's a new word, a grammar rule, or even just the courage to try again. But when negative self-talk stops you from making those mistakes, it also stops you from growing. It's like trying to learn to swim without ever getting into the water. Sure, you can read about swimming, but until you actually practice, you won't make real progress.
That's so true, Ryan. Mistakes aren't just inevitable. They're essential. And when you let fear of mistakes hold you back, you're actually slowing down your learning journey. Negative self-talk creates this false belief that you have to be perfect right away, which just isn't realistic. Everyone, literally everyone, makes mistakes when they're learning a new language. I want our listeners to think about this. What if you looked at mistakes as stepping stones instead of obstacles? Instead of thinking, I made a mistake, so I'm bad at English, try thinking, I made a mistake and now I know what to work on. That small shift in mindset can make a huge difference in how quickly you progress. And as you said, Ryan, when you focus on improvement instead of perfection, you free yourself from the mental block that negative self-talk creates.
Exactly, Priya. It's all about changing how you approach the process. And I think it's important to remind everyone listening that progress doesn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. Every small step you take, whether it's learning a new word or having a short conversation, adds up over time.
Absolutely, Ryan. And if you're listening and feeling like this is hitting close to home, don't worry. You're not alone, and there are ways to turn things around. Stick with us because the next part is all about solutions.
Now let's talk about how negative self-talk impacts your mental health, which is a crucial factor in learning English, or any skill for that matter. Constantly telling yourself things like, I'm not good enough, or I'll never get it right, creates this underlying sense of anxiety. Think about it. How can you focus on learning when your mind is weighed down with thoughts of failure or inadequacy? This stress can manifest in different ways. For example, you might feel a tightness in your chest when you try to speak English, or you might find yourself procrastinating because the idea of practicing feels overwhelming. It's not just about the language anymore. It becomes a mental burden that affects your entire learning process. And the worst part is, these feelings of stress and anxiety can make it even harder to stay motivated. Instead of looking forward to learning, you start dreading it.
Exactly, Ryan. And let's not forget how frustration ties into this. When you're constantly battling negative self-talk, every small mistake can feel like a huge setback. You might think, why do I even bother? I'll never improve. Over time, this frustration builds up and can lead to burnout. Burnout is more than just feeling tired. It's an emotional state where you feel completely drained and lose interest in something you once cared about. For English learners, this might look like quitting lessons, avoiding practice, or even deciding that learning English isn't worth the effort anymore. And that's such a shame because it's not your actual ability to learn that's the problem. It's the mental pressure you're putting on yourself. One thing to keep in mind is that our mental health doesn't exist in a vacuum. If you're already dealing with stress from work, family, or other responsibilities, Adding negative self-talk on top of that can be overwhelming. It's like carrying a heavy load and then piling on more weight. No wonder so many learners feel like giving up.
That's such an important point, Priya. And what's really heartbreaking is that this spiral of stress and frustration often leads people to think they're just not cut out for learning English, which couldn't be further from the truth. It's not about whether you're capable. It's about giving yourself the mental space and kindness to grow at your own pace. Another thing I want to highlight is how this mental strain affects your ability to concentrate. When your mind is constantly filled with doubts and negative thoughts, it's like trying to study in a noisy room. You might be reading a grammar rule or listening to a podcast, but instead of absorbing the information, you're distracted by thoughts like, "I'll probably forget this anyway." That lack of focus makes it harder to retain what you're learning, which feeds back into the frustration and stress. It's a vicious cycle.
Absolutely, Ryan. And I think it's also worth mentioning how negative self-talk can create a sense of isolation. When you're struggling mentally, it's easy to feel like you're the only one going through this. You might look at others and think, "They're so confident and fluent. Why can't I be like that?" But the truth is, many language learners face these challenges. They just don't talk about them. Feeling isolated can make it harder to reach out for help or encouragement, which only deepens the mental health impact. That's why it's so important to recognize these patterns and remind yourself that you're not alone. Everyone has doubts and setbacks, but what matters is how you respond to them. And here's the good news. Mental health challenges caused by negative self-talk aren't permanent. With the right strategies, you can break free from this cycle and start enjoying the learning process again. We'll talk more about those strategies later, but for now, remember that acknowledging the problem is the first step toward overcoming it.
Exactly, Priya. It's all about taking that first step and giving yourself permission to make mistakes and grow without judgment. For anyone listening, if you've been feeling anxious, stressed, or frustrated about your English learning, know that these feelings are valid, but they don't have to define your journey. Now that we've talked about how negative self-talk affects your learning, let's shift gears and focus on how you can recognize it. The first step toward breaking the cycle is becoming self-aware. You can't change what you don't notice, right? So the key is to pay attention to your inner thoughts when you're learning English. Start by asking yourself, what's running through my mind when I make a mistake? Are you thinking, "I'm terrible at this," or "I'll never get it right"? These are classic signs of negative self-talk. For example, after a conversation, you might feel discouraged, telling yourself that you're not good enough to communicate effectively. Or perhaps you find yourself thinking, "Why should I even bother speaking? I'll just embarrass myself." These thoughts are automatic, and they creep in without you even realizing it.
That's a great point, Ryan. And here's something to consider. Negative self-talk often shows up as a pattern of self-criticism after you try something new. For instance, if you've just tried speaking with a native speaker, your mind might instantly start picking apart everything you said wrong. Instead of focusing on what went well, you obsess over the mistakes. This is where we see the damage being done to your confidence and motivation. Another common sign is comparing yourself to others. You might look at someone who speaks English fluently and think, "I'll never be as good as them," or "I'll never speak like that." But the truth is, every language learner has a unique journey, and comparing your progress to someone else's is an easy trap to fall into. Instead of lifting you up, it can make you feel defeated and discouraged.
Exactly, Priya. It's easy to get caught up in the comparison game, but it's so important to remember that everyone learns at their own pace. Now, when it comes to recognizing negative self-talk, one powerful tool you can use is simply pausing and asking yourself, is this thought helping me improve, or is it holding me back? For example, when you think, "I can't do this," pause for a second. Instead of accepting that thought, challenge it. Ask yourself, what's one small thing I could improve next time? This simple shift in mindset helps you focus on solutions instead of dwelling on problems.
I love that, Ryan. Challenging your thoughts is a game changer. You don't have to accept every negative thought that comes into your mind as truth. And one way to really track and catch these thoughts is by journaling. I encourage you to keep a journal where you jot down your thoughts during or after your learning sessions. You don't need to write long entries. Just a few lines about how you felt during your practice can help you become more aware of your internal dialogue. For instance, after a speaking practice, write down what you were thinking. Did you feel frustrated or proud of yourself? Did you criticize your mistakes, or did you acknowledge the progress you made? By putting your thoughts on paper, you can start seeing patterns and noticing when negative self-talk is taking over. This awareness is the first step in changing the way you think and ultimately changing your learning experience.
Exactly, Priya. Journaling is a great way to externalize those internal thoughts. And once you become more aware of when negative self-talk is creeping in, you can begin to interrupt the pattern and replace it with something more constructive. But self-awareness doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process of paying attention to how you speak to yourself, especially during moments of struggle or frustration. As you work on building this awareness, remember that every step forward counts. Even recognizing that you've had a negative thought is a huge win. So, for now, start by paying attention to how you feel and what you're thinking when you're learning English. The more you tune into your inner dialogue, the more equipped you'll be to make positive changes.
And with that, we're setting the stage for what's coming next. Now that you know how to recognize negative self-talk, we'll be talking about how to change that negative inner dialogue and replace it with something more positive and helpful. Trust me, the next step is just as important for your progress.
Now that we've covered how to recognize negative self-talk, let's dive into how to challenge those thoughts and replace them with something more positive. One of the most effective techniques is called cognitive restructuring. In simple terms, this means replacing irrational, negative thoughts with more realistic and empowering ones. For instance, instead of thinking, "I can't speak English," you can reframe that thought to, "I may struggle with some words, but I'm learning and improving." It's all about shifting your focus from what's not working to what you are accomplishing. When you think about it, language learning is a gradual process. It's not about being perfect right away. It's about the effort you put in day after day to improve your skills. And recognizing this shift can completely transform your learning experience.
Exactly, Ryan. And this reframing doesn't have to be a grand gesture. It's about noticing and shifting the small, everyday thoughts that pop up. For example, let's say you've been practicing listening to native speakers, but you're struggling to keep up with the speed of their speech. A negative thought might be, "I'll never understand native speakers." Instead of letting that thought take over, try reframing it. "It's normal to struggle with speed, but I'll keep practicing to improve." By doing this, you start to see that your struggles are just part of the learning process, not a reflection of your ability. This change in perspective takes the pressure off and allows you to focus on the effort, rather than just the outcome. And remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Little by little, these small shifts in your thinking will lead to big improvements in your confidence and language skills.
That's such a great point, Priya. Reframing our thoughts helps us to see learning as a journey rather than something we either succeed at or fail. Now, another powerful technique to combat negative self-talk is using positive affirmations. These are short, empowering statements that you repeat to yourself to counteract doubt and reinforce your belief in your ability. For example, saying to yourself, "I am capable of learning English," or "mistakes help me improve," can shift your mindset from one of frustration to one of growth. The key here is repetition. The more you repeat these affirmations, the more they become ingrained in your mind. And over time, they'll start to shape your self-image in a more positive light. Don't be afraid to use affirmations daily, especially when doubt creeps in. They're a simple but powerful tool to help you stay on track and feel more confident in your learning.
Absolutely, Ryan. And affirmations are just one part of the puzzle. Another technique that works wonders is visualization. Visualization is all about mentally picturing yourself succeeding in the situations that cause you the most anxiety or fear. For instance, if you're nervous about speaking English with a native speaker, try to visualize yourself having a smooth conversation, feeling confident and at ease. This might sound a little unusual, but the power of visualization is incredible. It creates a mental image of success that makes the idea of speaking English feel more achievable. When you repeatedly imagine yourself succeeding, it reduces the intimidation factor and helps you approach real-life situations with greater ease. Plus, it allows your mind to rehearse these scenarios, so when they happen in real life, you're better prepared to handle them.
Visualization is a great mental exercise, Priya, and the best part is, it's something you can do anytime, whether you're on the bus, lying in bed, or even waiting in line. By creating a mental image of yourself succeeding, you're training your brain to expect success, not failure. And this positive mindset can make a huge difference when you're actually speaking English in real situations. So, we've covered 3 powerful techniques today: cognitive restructuring, positive affirmations, and visualization. Each of these techniques can be a game changer in your language learning journey. The key is consistency. The more you practice these methods, the more natural it will feel to replace negative self-talk with positive, empowering thoughts.
Exactly, Ryan. These techniques work best when they become a daily habit. And over time, you'll find that your language learning experience becomes less about fear and frustration and more about progress and growth. So, if you're feeling stuck or discouraged, remember that these tools are here to help you turn things around. Challenge those negative thoughts and replace them with something that moves you forward.
As we discussed earlier, challenging negative self-talk is key to moving forward in your language learning journey. Now let's dive into how positive self-talk can actually accelerate your learning. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is developing a growth mindset. But what exactly is a growth mindset? It's the belief that your abilities and intelligence aren't fixed. They can be developed with effort, practice, and perseverance. People with a growth mindset view challenges as opportunities to learn. They don't shy away from making mistakes. Instead, they embrace them as part of the learning process. In fact, when you have a growth mindset, failure isn't something to fear. It's something to learn from and use to fuel your progress. And this attitude is crucial when learning English, or any language for that matter.
That's right, Ryan. When you have a growth mindset, you're more likely to engage in conversations, try new things, and push yourself without the fear of failure holding you back. And this is such a game changer when it comes to learning English. With a growth mindset, you understand that fluency doesn't happen overnight. It takes time and consistent effort. You don't have to be perfect from the start. You just need to start, and the rest will come. So, how does this connect to positive self-talk? Well, when you consistently talk to yourself in a positive, growth-oriented way, you reinforce this mindset. Instead of thinking, "I can't do this," or "I'll never be fluent," you start telling yourself, "I am getting better every day," or "Every mistake helps me learn." These small shifts in your internal dialogue can make a huge difference in how you approach language learning.
I love that, Priya. Positive self-talk helps you embrace the idea that every step, even the missteps, is part of your progress. It also frees you from the pressure of perfection. Language learning is a process, and the more you accept that, the more confident you'll become. So when you tell yourself, "I am capable of having a conversation in English," it's not just a feel-good statement. It's a reminder that you're on the right path, and that you're capable of much more than you might initially believe. Positive self-talk doesn't just keep you motivated. It changes your whole approach to challenges. Instead of avoiding difficult conversations or new vocabulary because you're afraid of making mistakes, you'll feel empowered to tackle them head-on. This shift is what allows you to make progress faster. It's all about creating a mindset that encourages growth, rather than one that holds you back.
Absolutely, Ryan. And when you start applying positive self-talk in your language learning, you'll notice a shift in your overall approach. No longer will you feel defeated by mistakes or struggles. Instead, you'll see them as opportunities to learn and grow. So, imagine how your attitude towards speaking English would change if you started every conversation with the thought, "I'm capable of this," instead of, I'm going to mess up. It's a subtle difference, but it can completely transform your confidence. And it's not just about speaking. Positive self-talk also extends to other areas of learning, like reading, listening, and writing. If you approach these challenges with the belief that each effort is bringing you closer to your goal, you'll be more consistent, more focused, and more willing to push yourself out of your comfort zone.
Right, Priya. It's about transforming your mindset from one of self-doubt to one of self-belief. Positive self-talk shifts your focus from fear to growth. It helps you see that mistakes are not setbacks, they're simply part of the process. And with this mindset, you'll feel more confident trying new things, experimenting with vocabulary, and making mistakes that ultimately lead to improvement. So, to recap, by cultivating a growth mindset and using positive self-talk, you can accelerate your learning. You'll embrace challenges, understand that fluency takes time, and most importantly, stop fearing mistakes. Instead, you'll start welcoming them as essential steps towards success.
Exactly, Ryan. And if you start incorporating these techniques, positive affirmations, visualizations, and growth-oriented self-talk into your daily routine, you'll begin to see the impact on your progress. You won't just learn English faster, you'll also start enjoying the process more. Language learning becomes less about perfection and more about progress, and that's when the real growth happens.
So to wrap things up, remember that stopping negative self-talk and replacing it with positive, growth-oriented thoughts can significantly boost your English learning. Embrace challenges, make mistakes, and focus on the progress you're making, not the setbacks.
Exactly. By building a growth mindset and practicing positive self-talk, you'll not only accelerate your learning, but also enjoy the process more. Keep believing in yourself. You're capable of more than you think.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Speak Up. Keep practicing, stay positive, and we'll see you next time.